Good morning, gardeners, and welcome to Monday, June 12th. My name is Catherine, and I created a show called Good Morning Gardeners, even though I can't grow green things, because I am referring to gardening metaphorically. We're planting the seeds for a better day. We're starting our day by getting in the right mindset to cultivate a better life for ourselves, better communities, and a better world. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you would like to add Good Morning Gardeners to your morning routine. I do my best to wake you up with positive and mentally stimulating ideas, but sometimes I miss things. If you have something to add to the ideas that I discuss, please chime in the comment section below. Today is the World Day Against Child Labor. Since the year 2000, the world has been making steady progress by reducing child labor. But over the past few years, conflicts, crises, and the COVID-19 pandemic have plunged more families into poverty and forced millions more children into child labor. Economic growth has not been sufficient nor inclusive enough to relieve the pressure that too many families and communities feel that makes them resort to child labor. Today, 160 million children are still engaged in child labor. That is almost 1 in 10 children worldwide. This year, the UN is calling for the universal ratification of the ILO Convention number 138 on minimum age, which, together with the universal ratification of ILO Convention number 182 on worst forms of child labor, which was achieved in 2020, would provide all children with legal protection against all forms of child labor. The UN is also calling for the effective implementation of the Durban call to action. You can learn more about the Durban call to action at the link that I've put in the description of this video. So this morning, what I am going to talk a little bit about, because yesterday I was talking about how everyone has a role to play, in the future of humanity. I'm sorry, not yesterday. Friday, I spoke about how everybody has this role to play. Well, ever since I spoke about that to you guys, I was thinking about, or I have been thinking about, what is my own role? And I think, this question is something that I would hope everybody considers at some point in their life. I might have a tendency to think about it too much. Obviously, I am somebody who likes to think about things a lot, but I think it's good to periodically, take stock, reevaluate, and make sure that you are comfortable mentally and emotionally with what you are doing and the role that you are playing. And hopefully you feel, empowered about what you're doing and that it actually is making a difference, whether that's with your career or through your donations or just with how you interact with other people. I think a lot about what I can do with my career to make the world a better place, but I don't think it can be understated just being, how you interact with people and just being kind, compassionate, and understanding. But yeah, no, what I wanted to speak with you a little bit about was kind of my career journey and, how I ended up where I am right now. I'm not exactly sure whether I've discussed this on this show before, but I actually began my career path as a fine artist or a painter. And, I think I am just implicitly drawn to visual media. I haven't always been sure why, because, as a person, I'm not necessarily the most talented at drawing. I don't necessarily have like a photographic memory. Honestly, I'm not good with faces. I'm better with names. So I think, the position of artist has sometimes felt a little bit awkward for me. But nevertheless, I have been relentlessly drawn to it. After I began my career path as a fine artist, I decided that that wasn't realistic and I needed to go into a more technologically advanced arena. So then I moved to graphic design. After that, I thought, why not do something even more difficult? That's how I viewed it at the time, and go into game design. that's how I ended up with my degree in game art and development. And then after I graduated, I got hired as a UI designer. So I also have that under my belt. And now I have started my own agency specializing in brand design. Of course, there is a huge amount of overlap among all these disciplines. And, it has felt really limiting to me as a designer in my career, this like pressure to narrow it down and focus on only one thing. And actually, I still paint, and I still do many elements of my job when I work for clients. It still incorporates mostly graphic design and a ton of UI design as well when I create websites. So that is what I have been thinking about, but also I have been thinking about how along every stage of my journey, every time I made like a pivot, that was in part because I was undervaluing the role that I was playing when it comes to how helpful that specialty was, or just the role that I was playing like overall in like the course of humanity. And I would always try and think, what can I do that has more impact, or what can I do that would be more valuable? But of course, I want to stay in what I feel drawn to, which is visual media. And now that I am older, I'm the oldest I've ever been. I think that is a fallacy to think that, what you're doing right now isn't good enough. It isn't impactful enough or something like that, because a lot of times lately I have been leaning toward coming around full circle and focusing. I'm not actually going to do this, but sometimes I am tempted to just go back to focusing, all of my energy on fine art, because I do believe that there is an enormous impact to be made there, which is just hilarious to me, because when I was younger and I initially decided to pivot away from that, I just viewed it as like a hobby, like something that most people really couldn't create a career out of. And then even if you did make a career out of it, it wouldn't really be impactful. It would just be like one of those like shallow, pursuits. But anyway, I don't want to ramble on for too long this morning. In light of what I have spoken about not necessarily knowing whether you're on the right path and feeling like you might need to go to something else and feeling unsure of where to commit in your career, I want to jump into our feel-good moment today. I will be reading from Art as Therapy by Botton and Armstrong. And if you have ever felt like I have when it comes to trying to find your sense of direction, I hope these words will make you feel better about that. So it says, problems with careers often start with an unusual sensation. We know 100 things that we would hate to do with our lives, but beyond vague longings, we don't have a clear picture of where we should, in fact, direct our ambitions. We want to change things, to do something interesting and worthwhile, but we can't bring our interests into any kind of realistic focus. At this point, we tend to panic. We blame others for our woes, we declare the playing field rigged against us, we exaggerate our deficiencies, or we leap into the nearest so-called safe occupation that we know will not answer any of our inner needs, but which will, we reassure ourselves, at least earn us money and keep authority figures off our backs. It would be wise to apply a little patience, realizing that confusions about one's direction are a necessary part of a legitimate search for an authentic working life. Rather than evidence that one is doomed, feeling lost is the necessary first stage of a fruitful quest. So that's just a short little passage, but I just love that idea that, feeling lost is a good thing. Of course, that may just be because that, I like to hear that, but I I do like to think that that's true. And you can let me know in the comments below what you think about that, if that's actually true or whether that's just some sort of like feel-good drivel. But anyway, since we are speaking of career paths today, I wanted to bring you back in time to the very first design class that I took. Actually, I still have the textbook for that class, partly because I have always thought it would come in handy someday, and partly out of sentimentality. The book is called Design Basics, and it's by David A. Lauer and Stephen Pentak. I just want to read from this textbook the definition of design to you. What do you think of when you hear the word design? Do you associate design with fashion, graphics, furniture, or automotive style? Design has a more universal meaning than the commercial applications that might first come to mind. A dictionary definition uses the synonym plan. To design indeed means to plan or to organize. Design is inherent in the full range of art disciplines from painting and drawing to sculpture, photography, and time-based media such as film, video, computer graphics, and animation. It is integral to crafts such as ceramics, textiles, and glass. Architecture, landscape, architecture, and urban planning all apply visual design principles. The list could go on. Virtually the entire realm of 2- and 3-dimensional human production involves design, whether consciously applied, well executed, or ill-considered. Design is essentially the opposite of chance. In ordinary conversation, when we say it happened by design, we mean something was planned. It did not occur just by accident. People in all occupations plan, but the artist or designer plans the arrangement of elements to form a visual pattern. Depending on the field, those elements will vary, from painted symbols to written words to scenic flats to bowls to furniture to windows and doors. But the result is always a visual organization. So I love that definition, and I'm glad I held on to this textbook because I think it is good to remind myself that design is organization, and this is most likely one of the primary reasons why I have always been drawn to visual media, because I am a very organized person. I love organization, and I can also very easily become overstimulated, especially if I am in an environment that is not organized. Now this line of thought reminded me of something else that I read in Art as Therapy about the chaotic visual stimulation most of us are exposed to on a daily basis. Imagine everything your eyes must process when you walk or drive down a city street. Various styles of architecture, dozens or hundreds of signs, vehicles, benches, traffic lights, fire hydrants, billboards. The list could go on, right? Even if you, that's very visually overstimulating, and I would think that this has got to be a very recent problem for humanity, because cities, at least, on a large scale, are relatively recent. And, previously to cities, people would live like where I live now in a village, which is quite, relaxing to look out. I love looking out at my window at the mountains, hills. There are no billboards, there are houses, but there's not like an overwhelming amount of different architecture styles, for example. But anyway, like, even if you just stay home and watch YouTube, you are still inundated with a dizzying array of video thumbnails and advertisements. And don't get me started on the visual experience of scrolling social medias like Instagram or TikTok. So in this section of Art as Therapy that I'm going to read next, the authors are providing an argument in the defense of the censorship of visual stimuli. Now, bear in mind, I don't necessarily agree with what they are arguing here, but I do find it very interesting, and I wanted to share it with you this morning. They write, "Censorship does not meet with much enthusiasm these days. We tend to think of it as a small-minded, defensive interference with a cherished freedom to express ourselves. We associate it with book burning, political repression, and ignorant intolerance. However, it is time to recognize that in most countries, this phase has definitely passed. We should revisit the idea of censorship and potentially consider it not as an unenlightened suppression of crucial ideas, but as a sincere attempt to organize the world for our benefit. The threat now is not that wonderful truths will be repressed by malign authorities, but rather that we will drown in chaos, overwhelmed by irrelevant and unhelpful trivia, unable to concentrate on what is genuinely important. The key argument of those who attack censorship today is to claim that we need to hear all the messages. But we don't. We don't, for example, need to hear a message about what kind of perfume it would be nice to buy when taking in a great piece of urban architecture. There's nothing wrong with the advertisement itself. The problem is the location. It's depressing to the human spirit because it enacts on a large scale in a conspicuous and prestigious place a weakness that we know we need to overcome in ourselves, our tendency to distraction and inner chaos. I am looking at the facade of an interesting and rather lovely building. Then, suddenly, I am being prompted to consider a new toiletry item. The advertisement unintentionally supports our lack of focus and attention. Things that draw us away from our best potential should not be paraded in front of us, asking for admiration. In this case, censorship would be entirely justified. It would be about taking care that the public environment should reflect and thus comfort and support our better natures. Censoring an incongruous billboard on the side of a much-loved building in a city where people visit explicitly to appreciate the architecture is hardly controversial, but such an example reveals underlying principles that can be put to further use. The most beautiful cities in the world are almost never produced by accident. They get to be that way because of rules about what you are not allowed to do as well as what you should do. The new town of Edinburgh was built from the late 18th to the early 19th centuries by the efforts of many private speculative builders who bought plots of land and constructed houses on them. A magnificent and harmonious result was only achieved, however, because of a master plan indicating the line of the streets and squares and the positioning of major public buildings. There were elaborate regulations about what could be built. The houses were to be put up in a continuous line. No signposts were to be projected on the walls. There were rules about the height of buildings in different streets, the number of stories they could have, and the kind of stone they had to be faced with. Finally, the plans and elevations had to be approved by a committee of the town council, who were guided by the demand for frontages not much ornamented, but with elegant simplicity. We typically think that if there is a case for censorship, it should be made against extremism. If we are to ban anything, it should be images of horror and exploitation. However, the rationale for censorship is better seen in terms of the desired atmosphere of the general environment. Advocates of a so-called free market complain that to restrict certain activities is to deny us freedom, but there's a distinction to be made between the freedom to allow anything to take place, from the ruin of nature to random violence, and the freedom to foster what is good. The latter may, paradoxically, require censorship. Freedom is not, despite what we are often told, a cardinal virtue across all areas of life. The underlying issue is that we are deeply sensitive to visual stimuli. The modern world is conflicted about how much what lies in front of our eyes matters. On the one hand, it is suggested that art is an extremely important medium, and that a painting no larger than a few centimeters in diameter may have a power to alter our lives. On the other hand, we are quite happy to abandon large tracts of the earth to the haste and greed of developers, and assume that we will not significantly be affected by their work. Our willingness to understand harm too often stretches only to the non-visual senses. We admit the harm of air pollution, even of some kinds of noise, yet we are not yet at a stage when ugliness is seen as an ill like any others. A politician who ran on a platform wanting to make his or her country more beautiful would immediately be laughed off the stage. We fall back on falsely robust notions that such a priority would be fey or elitist, or accept the pernicious suggestions from developers that attractive environments cost too much. They don't necessarily. They just require talent, a little thought, and some rules. We should accept that the visual sensitivity we are happy to recognize and honor in our responses at the museum continue when we walk out the door. We are the same people when we have to confront an ugly assortment of buildings or negotiate a smashed-up underground station as we were when we were contemplating Giovanni Bellini's Madonna of the Meadow. If we allow that art has the power to alter us for the better, we must also be aware that the opposite of art, by which we mean the opposite of the values that are embedded within good works of art, can also harm us. We cannot claim both that art will elevate us and that ugliness will leave us unaffected. So, as I said, I don't necessarily agree with what might be interpreted as the call to action there. The first time I read it, I thought it was pretty extreme and crazy, but, I do often think about that, especially when I become overstimulated in public areas. But designing the visual environment for large groups of people is a complicated thing, and regulation is just one aspect of how that can be done. And currently, right now, where I'm at, I do not have my own, alternative manifesto for what should be done. I just, I think that this passage brings up a lot of interesting questions. Why don't we tend to prioritize visual pollution on the same level as noise pollution? When architecture design is regulated, who decides the rules and how do they decide them? How could we humans cultivate a more organized visual environment that is better aligned with our values and inspires us to be better people? Let me know your ideas, what you think about that argument for censorship in the comments. But for now, I'm going to move on to the focus moment. And for this moment today, I want to offer you a simple exercise that you can do anytime you start to feel visually overwhelmed or overstimulated. You can do it right now if you like, but I tend to find this most effective at the end of a long day, after my eyes and mind are tired from making and processing an overwhelming amount of visual information. This is how to do this exercise, which I will call a visual release. First, sit or lie down somewhere comfortable where you feel safe and are unlikely to be disturbed. If you wear glasses, remove them. Next, rub your hands together vigorously for 30 to 60 seconds until your hands become very warm. Then place your hands over your eyes and leave them there for at least 2 minutes. The base of your palm should be at the bottom of your eye socket, and the top of your palm should be at the top of your eye socket where your eyebrow is. This will allow you to cup your eyeball in the hollow part of your palm, making it easy to refrain from pressing too hard there. 2 minutes doesn't sound like much, but it feels a lot longer when you are sitting there in complete darkness with nothing to do. However, I do encourage you to remain diligent and stick with it, because this visual release exercise is not only good for your eyes, it's good for your mind too. This exercise is great because it's so simple that you don't need anything except your own hands, and often the simplest exercises are the most effective. Personally, I find that this visual release is very relaxing for my eye muscles and refreshing for my mind. Like I said, I recommend that you find a time in the evening to do the visual release, but for now, you might just want to prepare yourself mentally for a time when you will feel visually overwhelmed or overstimulated. Try to imagine a time that you have felt this way, and see if you can realize any predictable patterns for when you commonly become visually overstimulated. With this in mind, plan a time for the future when you can do this exercise, when it will be the most effective. For example, I often become very overstimulated at the grocery store, so I would plan to do this visual release when I get home from a grocery shopping trip. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you have a wonderful day. I will speak with you again tomorrow.